Las Vegas. Some point in the 1990s, though the exact date no longer matters and perhaps never did, in a casino that smells of recycled air and cigarettes and the particular synthetic carpet that every casino in America seems to have ordered from the same manufacturer, a large man in a loud shirt is sitting alone in front of a slot machine. Not at a baccarat table, not at blackjack, not craps, not at any of the games that attract the kind of high roller attention that comes with hosts and credit lines and pit bosses pretending not to watch. A slot machine. A single slot machine in a row of identical slot machines in a casino that is doing steady business around him while he sits there as if the rest of the building does not exist. He has been sitting there for 12 hours. He will be there for 4 more. His name is John Daly. He is one of the longest hitters in the history of professional golf, a man whose relationship with a golf club produces results that other professional golfers, men who have dedicated their entire lives to the game, watch with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. He has won the PGA Championship. He has won the Open Championship at St. Andrews, the oldest and most prestigious tournament in golf, on the course where the game itself was invented. He has made millions of dollars on tour, millions more in endorsements, millions more from the kind of fame that comes with being simultaneously the most talented and most chaotic personality in a sport that does not know quite what to do with either quality. He has also, by his own accounting, lost $90 million gambling on slot machines. $90 million. Not at baccarat tables with casino hosts and private rooms and the trappings of high roller sophistication. At slot machines. The same machines available to anyone who walks through a casino door with a $20 bill. The same machines designed, at their mechanical and psychological core, to extract money from the person sitting in front of them as efficiently as possible. John Daly sat in front of those machines and fed them $90 million across the course of a career that should have generated enough wealth to sustain him indefinitely. And he did it in sessions that sometimes ran 16 hours, sometimes more, in casinos across America, feeding coins and bills and markers into a device that returned nothing but the sensation he needed and could not stop needing. This is the story of John Daly, the wildest, saddest, funniest, most self-destructive talent in the history of professional golf. A man who could do things with a golf club that defied reasonable explanation and could not do things with money and alcohol and gambling that most functioning adults manage without difficulty. A man who was, in the same body and the same career and the same lifetime, genuinely great and genuinely lost. This is the story of those two things living together and what happened when the lost part ran the numbers. It begins in Carmichael, California, in 1966, though it moves quickly to Arkansas, which is where John Daly's story really takes shape. Jim and Lou Daly raised their son in Dardanelle, Arkansas, a small town on the Arkansas River in the western part of the state. It was not a prosperous town. It was the kind of place where kids grow up with a specific relationship to the outdoors, hunting, fishing, sport, because the outdoors is available and accessible and free in a way that other forms of entertainment are not. John grew up with those things, absorbed them, and also found golf. Golf is an unusual game to find in a small Arkansas town in the 1970s. It is a game associated, in the American imagination, with country clubs and collared shirts and a social register that does not overlap significantly with the demographic realities of Dardanelle. But there was a course nearby and John Daly started playing it, and somewhere in those early rounds, somewhere between the frustration and the repetition and the physical sensation of striking a ball cleanly, something lit up inside him that was not going to go out. He could hit the ball. Not just far, though. Far was the first thing anyone noticed. He could hit it with a combination of distance and accuracy that exists, in the natural world of golf, at the very top of a very steep pyramid. The swing was unorthodox, a massive, looping, over-the-top motion that every conventional golf instructor would have dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. John Daly kept the swing because the swing worked, in the specific and unarguable way that things which produce results work, regardless of what they look like. He led the PGA Tour in driving distance repeatedly across his career. There were years when the gap between John Daly's average drive and the next longest driver on tour was not a few yards, but dozens of yards. He was at the peak of his powers, doing something with a driver that other professional golfers simply could not replicate. He was also, from early in his life, drinking. The alcohol arrived the way it arrives in many lives, gradually, socially, and then with increasing necessity. He drank in high school. He drank in college at the University of Arkansas, where his golf was good enough to attract attention, but his off-course behavior was already generating the kind of stories that follow a man. He turned professional and drank. He drank on tour and between tournaments and at the bars that tournament towns provide, and in the hotel rooms where the minibar exists for exactly this kind of extended engagement. He was open about it. This is a quality that runs through John Daly's public life like a seam, an almost compulsive openness about his failures, his vices, his worst decisions, as if the confession were somehow the thing that made them manageable. He talked about the drinking, he talked about the gambling, he talked about the marriages, all four of them, and the circumstances surrounding each one's end. He was, in the specific vocabulary of celebrity self-disclosure, unusually willing to be honest about things that other public figures carefully managed and concealed. Whether this honesty was therapeutic for him, or whether it was a different kind of performance, is a question that only he can answer. The PGA Championship, August 1991. Crooked Stick Golf Club, Carmel, Indiana. This is the moment where John Daly's story becomes, briefly and brilliantly, a genuine fairy tale. One of the most unlikely victories in the history of professional golf. He was the ninth alternate for the tournament. Not even the first alternate, not the second, the ninth. When multiple players withdrew from the field in the days before the tournament began, the call went down the alternates list, and eventually it reached John Daly. He drove through the night from Memphis to Indianapolis. He arrived having never seen the golf course. He had no caddy of his own. He borrowed a caddy named Jeff Medlin, who was already at the tournament. He did not play a practice round. He went to the first tee and hit the ball. He won the tournament by 3 shots. He played 4 rounds of golf on a course he had never seen and won the most prestigious non-major title in professional golf. The story was so improbable that the press coverage reached beyond golf, into the general sports pages, and then into general news. The man who drove through the night and won, grip it and rip it, a phrase that attached itself to Daly and never quite let go, became overnight one of the most recognized names in American sport. The money came with it. Tournament winnings, endorsements, appearance fees from tournaments around the world that wanted the long hitter, the colorful personality, the name that moved tickets. By the time he won the Open Championship at St. Andrews in 1995, a tournament he won in a playoff against Costantino Rocca, on the most famous golf course in the world, watched by millions of television viewers globally, he was earning at the level that sustained, properly managed, the rest of a life. The gambling had started before the money. That sequence matters. John Daly was not a man who found gambling after he had money to lose. He was a man who found gambling in the ordinary way, as something available, accessible, cheap to enter at the lower levels, and who carried it with him into the years of wealth the way you carry a habit you formed before you understood what habits cost. The preference for slot machines, which strikes most observers as the detail that defines his gambling, was genuine and consistent. He did not gravitate toward the table games that attract high-profile gamblers. He did not sit in private baccarat rooms with casino hosts managing his credit line. He sat at slot machines in the general casino floor, surrounded by ordinary people feeding ordinary amounts into the machines beside him, and he fed enormous amounts into his machine and kept feeding. The scale was the only distinction. He described his slot machine sessions in his autobiography, published in 2006, entitled My Life in and Out of the Rough, with a specificity that made the book one of the most discussed sports memoirs of its year. He described sessions of 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. He described the state he entered. Not exactly pleasure, not exactly relaxation, but a quality of focused suspension that the machine provided and that nothing else in his life reliably provided. The alcohol and the gambling worked together, each one lowering the threshold that might otherwise have stopped the other. He lost $1.65 million in 5 hours on one occasion, by his own account. He lost $600,000 in a single session on another. These were not isolated incidents. They were the pattern, large, sustained, Repeated losses that consumed the money as fast as the money arrived and sometimes faster. The earnings from his playing career were significant, but not infinite. Tournament winnings across a career that, despite the turbulence, produced many competitive rounds and a number of victories, ran into the tens of millions of dollars. Endorsements added more. But the spending, on gambling, on the lifestyle that surrounded it, on the alcohol, on the legal and personal costs of 4 marriages and multiple professional suspensions, ran at a rate that exceeded the earnings with a consistency that only became fully visible in retrospect. The suspensions were a recurring feature of his professional life. The PGA Tour, which has specific policies governing player conduct and which takes particular interest in conduct that attracts negative attention to the sport, suspended Daly multiple times across his career. Some suspensions were related to alcohol. Some were related to behavior on the course, incidents that in a less prominent player might have passed without formal consequence, but that in Daly's case attracted scrutiny precisely because of his visibility. He was reinstated each time because his talent was real and the tour knew that John Daly at his best was a draw that generated significant interest in the game. There was a period in the mid-1990s when the combination of his championship credentials, his driving distance, his personality, and his lifestyle made him simultaneously one of the most popular and most troubled figures in American sport. Galleries followed him at tournaments not just to watch the golf, which was extraordinary when it was working, but because something was always happening in the vicinity of John Daly. He generated events. He was, in the specific sense that the sports media found invaluable, newsworthy at all times, for reasons that had nothing to do with his tee shots. He checked into rehabilitation programs multiple times. The Betty Ford Center, other facilities. Each time the narrative around him shifted briefly to recovery, to the possibility of a sustained period of sobriety that would allow the talent to operate without the self-destruction running beside it. Each time, the sobriety lasted for a period and then did not. He was honest about this too. He did not pretend the rehabilitation had worked when it had not. He said in various interviews and in his book that the addiction was what it was, a thing with its own logic and its own momentum, that treatment could interrupt but not permanently resolve. By the time his autobiography appeared in 2006, the $90 million figure had entered the public record in the specific way that numbers enter public records when a person names them themselves. He put it in print. $90 million, lost gambling, primarily on slot machines. The number produced the kind of response that such numbers always produce. Disbelief, then calculation, then the inevitable comparison to what $90 million represents in ordinary human terms. It is a number that exceeds the combined lifetime earnings of several hundred ordinary American workers. It was fed into machines that returned nothing but the continuation of the session. The reaction to the number was complicated by the way Daly presented it, not with shame exactly, and not with pride, but with the same flat candor that characterized all his self-disclosures. It happened. It cost this much. Here's what it was like. The tone was almost journalistic, which was perhaps the only tone available to a man who had spent 20 years being reported on and had internalized the reporter's distance from his own story. He kept playing golf. This is the fact about John Daly that the $90 million tends to obscure. He did not stop. He played in tournaments through his 40s and into his 50s, long past the age when most professional golfers have either retired or transitioned to the senior tour. His results were inconsistent, exceptional rounds interspersed with ones that reflected the cumulative toll of the lifestyle. But his presence on the course remained distinctive. When John Daly was playing well, galleries still gathered. The swing was still the swing. The distance was still the distance, reduced with age, but still remarkable. He was still, in the diminished version, more interesting to watch than most golfers at their peak. He moved to the Champions Tour, the senior circuit for players over 50, and found there a more accommodating environment, a schedule less punishing than the full PGA Tour, and opponents closer to his own stage of life and career. He won on the Champions Tour. He was competitive. He wore the same loud printed trousers that had become his signature, designed by a company called Loudmouth Golf. Trousers and patterns that golf's conservative aesthetics had no framework for, and that seemed specifically designed to announce that their wearer had made a decision about what kind of person he intended to be in public. He had a relationship with Hooters Casino in Las Vegas that became, in the later years of his career, one of the more publicly documented of his casino associations. He was photographed there. He was known there. The casino, which positioned itself as a casual alternative to the more formal luxury casino environment, suited a man whose gambling preference was a slot machine rather than a baccarat table. The money, 90 million of it, is gone. He has been open about his financial situation in his later years. It is not the situation of a man who managed his career earnings into permanent security. There have been legal and financial difficulties across the years, the accumulated consequence of spending that exceeded earning across a career that should have been sufficient. He is not destitute, but he is not wealthy in the way that 2 major championship victories and decades of professional earnings should have guaranteed. His health has been a recurring subject in recent years. He has dealt with various physical issues that are consistent with decades of the lifestyle he has described openly. He lost significant weight at one point, which generated extensive media coverage of the kind that attaches to visible physical change in a public figure. He has discussed his health with the same openness he applies to everything else. He is in his late 50s now. He still plays golf. He still generates the specific kind of attention that a career like his, lived the way his has been lived, produces in the people who followed it. He is, in the taxonomy of American sports figures, genuinely beloved. Not despite the failures, but somehow because of them. Because he never pretended. Because he stood in front of a press conference after his worst days and told the truth in sentences that most public figures spend their entire careers learning to avoid. There's a specific kind of American story that John Daly's life tells. The story of talent that is real and enormous and ultimately insufficient to protect the person who carries it from themselves. The golf was real. The driving was real. The 2 major championships are real and permanent and belong to him regardless of what the slot machines took. Those things cannot be lost. They are in the record. They will be in the record as long as golf's history is kept. What the slot machines took is also real. $90 million is a number that requires no embellishment. It is, in the specific and unarguable language of mathematics, enough money to have sustained John Daly, his children, and his grandchildren in complete comfort for the rest of their lives. And instead it was converted into 16-hour sessions in casino chairs, into the spinning of reels, into the electrical simulation of consequence that slot machines provide and that John Daly needed the way other people need oxygen. The machines do not know that he won at St. Andrews. They never did. They processed his money the same way they process everyone's money, indifferently, efficiently, at the fixed rate that their programming specifies, returning enough to sustain the illusion and taking the rest with mathematical certainty. He sat in front of them for 16 hours at a time, this man who could hit a golf ball 320 yards with a borrowed driver on a course he had never seen. And they took $90 million from him, and he kept sitting there. That is the whole story. That is all of it. There's nothing else to add.